Hi there, this is Power in Politics. I'm David Cochrane in Ottawa, where the election endgame is set to begin. Liberal leader Mark Carney met with his cabinet today to strategize on how to deal with Donald Trump and to plan for trade negotiations that could start as soon as May if he wins. But with 2 weeks left to go before we know that winner, is the NDP throwing in the towel? Jagmeet Singh makes a pitch to voters that isn't a call for an NDP government. Plus, Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre tries to find a path to victory. What once seemed like an easy win now looks like a winding and difficult path. We will break down the road to a majority for the Liberals and the Conservatives. It's day 20 of the federal election campaign. Power in Politics starts right now. Okay, well, our party insiders are here, as you can see. We've got Greg McEachern, we've got Fred Delury, we've got Melanie Richer, and throughout the course of this first hour, we are going to walk through the path to victory for the various parties and show what steps they need to take to potentially get to a majority government. We're going to get to that in just a minute, but let's just quickly take the temperature here of where everybody thinks we are at the end of week 3. Fred, what's your thoughts on where this campaign is right now?
Well, look, if you believe the polls, which I say I do, it is a narrowing path for the Conservatives right now. It is getting harder and harder to see where we can win this election. There is still lots of time. There's still several weeks to go, and the debate's coming up. There's still movement that could happen, but it's got to happen. Something needs to change. You can't just keep doing what we've been doing. It's clearly not working. So there needs to be an adaptation at a higher level than what we've seen. Right.
All right. Greg, what about your thoughts? Where do you think we are?
I think things are firming up. You're getting your voter card in the mail, so you know that there's advanced voting coming up, and the Liberals are are up in the polls, and that doesn't usually happen. Sometimes there isn't this clarity like at the time of the advanced voting. Nothing is sticking for the Conservatives, and it just kind of seems to be a lot of randomness. On the Liberal side, I'm told that there are seats in play that haven't been in play for a long time.
Mel, your thoughts right now?
Yeah, agreed about the firming up, and folks, I think, are starting to hear what the endgame message is from all parties and what that looks like going into debates next week. I think, we usually debates don't do anything for elections, but we have seen some elections where the debates have been a wild card and has changed things. I think particularly as it relates to Quebec, which will be important, I think, for the Liberals if they want that majority. So that's what I'm looking forward to next, is what that looks like next week.
Okay, we're going to pause this just for a quick second, and we're going to talk to a couple of guests first before we get back to our panel. Liberal leader Mark Carney, he was off the campaign trail and donning his Prime Minister's hat today. Carney is here in Ottawa today, where he met with a committee of his cabinet to discuss President Trump's trade war, which he says has already started to impact Canada's economy.
We left instructions for officials to ensure that the next government, whichever government Canadians choose, will be in the best possible position for negotiations with the United States, which, as the President and I have agreed, will begin from the start of May.
Okay, with the financial markets spiraling and in chaos, Trump paused some of his global tariffs this week, but he kept his tariffs on Canada. The other party leaders spoke about that today on the campaign trail.
In a moment when Trump threatens our country, we need leaders who will do more than just stand up for Canada. We must protect what makes us proud to be Canadian.
While the rest of the world is getting pauses on Trump's tariffs, there are more tariffs on Canada today than when Mark Carney became Prime Minister. Now, I'm not blaming Mr. Carney for that. He has no control over President Trump, but that's why he should stop promising that he does.
Okay, for more on this trade war, we're joined by former Deputy Prime Minister and former Quebec Premier Jean Charest, who is also a member of the Prime Minister's Council on Canada-U.S. Relations. Jean Charest, good to speak with you again. Thank you for being here, sir.
Thank you, David.
Last time we spoke was Liberation Day. I don't know if that's going to stick as a holiday, but that's what the President called it. A lot has happened since then. I mean, what's your sense of where things stand right now in the Canada-U.S. relationship?
Well, on what they call Liberation Day, we sort of suffered from the Stockholm Syndrome with an impression that we had avoided a hit. But in fact, we continue to have tariffs on aluminum, on steel. These apply to the world, but we are the most important supplier, and then automobiles, and then the fentanyl tariffs of 25%, except for everything that's under the umbrella of CUSMA. So we are still in a situation where we have to defend our interests. The government has decided to retaliate. I should point out that this is a world of very bad choices, David. I mean, there are no good choices. And everyone is very much aware that the tariffs the Americans impose on us hurt us. Retaliation also hurts us. I mean, but we've made a decision that we want to meet force with force. And so this is where we are at. What's interesting, though, one thing that I find encouraging is that the Americans have pointed out that they want the USMCA to be part of the overall scenario, which means that on the table there is still a scenario by which we can conclude or negotiate a trade agreement based on that if we're not in a world of tariffs. Because if we are, well, there's no point in having a trade deal. The Prime Minister Carney and the President agreed that they would negotiate after this election campaign, and it's on that basis that it would happen. And if that's the case, well, then maybe there is a path for us to conclude an agreement that would get rid of the tariffs.
Well, on the tariffs, when we spoke last week, you said that the government needs to look at a more targeted approach, right? On top of the $125 billion or whatever the number is now that's out there. Howard Lutnick made some suggestion this week that Canada should back off on its retaliatory tariffs because he made the point it didn't work out well for China, which is now up to 145%. There's no sign that's happening from the Canadian side. I mean, do you think it could get to that point, or do you think it is status quo right up until whoever wins and whatever happens after that?
Well, and since then, we have not seen any further retaliation from the American administration. I think they themselves now have gone and moved to the classic Trump strategy and modus operandi, shock and awe. So he hits people with tariffs, suspends, then negotiates. And in the case of Canada, there's been no escalation since we have retaliated, and the China situation has escalated. Now, why is China important? And it's important to Canada, by the way, David. It's 45% of the world's economy when you combine the GDP of the United States and China. So this is going to have fallout all over the world, and that's obviously keeping them very busy. In the meantime, I think we just need to stay very focused, stay on the strategy we have right now, and once the election campaign is passed, then we have to sit down and see how much of a negotiation we can get going.
But you know, Mr. Charest, the economic pain, the stock market losses, the anxiety, the data, the political pushback, none of it seems to be moving Donald Trump. I mean, he crashed the market, and then when he eased off, it came back up, and he took credit for the rebound. But he's still got a tariff level in place on all of these economies and China, which is still causing major damage. I mean, what is the pressure point as you see it? Because I know you're in Washington recently, that could get the president to shift on this, because he kind of responded this week by having a public cabinet meeting where he just got praised by all the people whose jobs depend on him, and he shows no signs of really moving beyond the 10% at this point.
There's two indicators that seem to move the president. One is the markets, the obvious one. The second one is 10-year bonds, which is going to have an impact on his budget process. And David, what's going to be interesting in the next few weeks is that this story is going to move to the budget process in the United States, where he needs to have interest rates at a reasonable level to be able to get through the process and start controlling the deficit and the debt. And so the bond markets are now a factor that weigh in more heavily than they used to. The other thing that's changing is that last week in Congress, there was a vote in the Senate, not a vote that has a consequence on the administration, but yet 4 Republican senators voted with the Democrats to ask that they suspend the tariffs towards Canada. The other significant thing that happened, he had to withdraw the candidacy of Elise Stefanik for ambassador to the UN because his count number is too tight in the American Congress. All of these are signs that these events are catching up with him. And you can guess, you're pretty much a good guess, that last week was not a good day when a lot of American, I imagine, congressmen and business people were telling him to relent. So there is pressure. Things are happening. There is a cumulative effect, and this will obviously determine the path as he moves ahead. He needs to reach agreements as we move ahead.
Yeah, the bond market one is interesting because he seems willing to maybe tolerate a recession, but not a depression, and so maybe that's the key point there. But you know, Mr. Charest, we spoke with Democratic Senator Jean Charest from New Hampshire, former governor there, one of the ranking members on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. She argues that what Trump is essentially doing here is not going to hurt China, but it could very well send a lot of people into the arms of China, and pointing to meetings that South Korea and Japan have had with China in the wake of all of this. I mean, is that a potential way you see things reordering if the U.S. just becomes difficult to work with? More difficult.
David, you're right. There is, one of the consequences is there's going to be a reordering of geopolitics in the world. And China's now sitting down with Japan and South Korea to look at how they could do a trade deal together. And the American actions are pushing them in that direction. China has decided to flatline their tariffs with Africa. They're going to use the soft power they have that the Americans are not using to be able to increase their influence throughout the world. And so this has, it's going to have real consequences. The other thing about the 2nd of April and his Liberation Day is that as long as the Americans are in a bilateral relationship with someone, except maybe China, they can use their power. But on the 2nd of April, I don't know if they realized they were taking on the world. Now, if they take on the world, then it's a different power relationship, and the pushback was such that they had to relent. And that's what they're having to deal with as they deal with the tariffs as they move ahead. They're going to tank their own economy as they continue on this path and push them into a recession. It'll hurt Canada, but their consumers are going to feel the impact. China, mind you, I mean, they have been the manufacturer of the American economy and consumers for years now. If prices go up the way they're going to go up, it'll have a real impact on the budget of American families.
Jean Charest, former Premier of Quebec, former Deputy Prime Minister, we appreciate your time today, sir. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, David.
Okay, we're going to move on to the other big story here in Canada because hundreds of workers in Ingersoll, Ontario have been laid off as the General Motors assembly plant halts production or will be laid off. The company said in a statement Friday that the closure is a result of the market and that it will reopen in October with reduced production. Here to discuss the impact on Canadian workers is the National President of Unifor, Lana Payne. Lana, it's good to see you, even in a difficult day. Thank you for being here.
Thanks, David.
This, we've been bracing for more job losses in the auto sector as a result of what Donald Trump has done with tariffs, but this has more to do with the electric vehicle market, as we understand it. Walk us through the reasons behind what's happening in Ingersoll.
Well, you can't untangle these two factors, David. That's the reality. I understand what the company's saying, and I understand that our members have been knowledgeable of reduced sales and what they've been building in this facility. But we have seen two things. That is a change in yes, market demand, but also a change in policy around electrification of the automobile industry in the United States under Donald Trump. And now the tariffs are providing another crushing impact that is just driving down demand and driving down sales. All of these things are connected, and they're all as a result of one person right now, the President of the United States.
Right, but Lana, I guess even before the tariffs came in, governments here in Canada were kind of ending the EV rebates and incentive programs were going offline, and the electric vehicle mandate in the United States is very much in doubt, right, with President Trump.
Yes.
I mean, are those the main things? Because it sounds like when you look at this plant, it was very much moving in that direction, specializing in electric vehicles. That seems to be the critical factor, I guess. So what does it look like in Ingersoll when it does get back to what its new level of operation is going to be?
Yeah, I mean, you can't untangle the two, David, and I wouldn't want to. What is going to happen is that there will be almost a 50% cut in the workforce, 40 to 50%, which means a lot of people, a lot of workers, a lot of families, the whole community are impacted by this. And we will be down to one shift at the CAMI facility. for the foreseeable future, and that is a problem. There are a number of things that can happen here. We are going to pressure the company, as you would expect us to do, to mitigate the layoffs, to look at alternatives in terms of boosting production at the facility. And, we're calling on levels of government to match up their industrial policy with the use of procurement dollars. And there are things that we can do to help the CAMI plant, whether it's building electric vans for Canada Post or whatever it is, because they're looking to change over their fleet, to make sure that this plant gets through this trade war. That the reality is that the forecasts are now showing that sales and demand for vehicles are going to drastically reduce under this tariff regime, and that's what we have to be thinking about. It's potentially 1.8 to 2 million fewer vehicles that will be sold in 2025 because of these tariffs, and that's 8 assembly plants, David. That is, you just can't. You can't change the numbers. Donald Trump is crushing the North American auto industry with these tariffs, and it is going to hurt workers all across the continent.
Lana, where do things stand, do you think, in sort of the transition towards making more electric vehicles in this country? I mean, the consumer carbon tax is not going to survive this election. I mean, it was set to zero by Mark Carney on April 1 of this year. And that was one of the real incentives out there, the price at the pump to drive people to buy electric vehicles. There are deals with Volkswagen, there are deals with Stellantis for the battery plants, but with the changing attitude in the U.S. and the shifting attitudes here, where does this sort of leave this transition? And do you think those big industrial plants or those big battery plants?
This is what I have said to the automakers that we deal with, and that is they want to be very, very careful here, David, that they ease up on the path forward to electrification, because there's a whole part of the world that is already far, far ahead of them, including China. And if they're not careful, China's going to eat their lunch here. So this is not just a problem for today. It is a problem for 3 and 5 years down the road if they don't go ahead with transformation. It's happening all across the world, and North America can't be left behind here.
Okay, and just one last question for you, Lana. I just wonder, this comes shortly after the Stellantis closure that we talked about before, right? The temporary closure. There is this worry of contagion and more closures and the ripple effect throughout the parts suppliers. I mean, where are things a week or so since we last spoke on these things?
Well, we still have obviously a lot of members out of work at the Stellantis plant. We got word later today that our members will go back to work for 2 weeks, both shifts on April 21st and the week into April 28th. And then after that, we don't know. So that's a problem. We saw shifts being canceled at Oshawa this week because of parts shortages from the United States. Transmissions were not available to build these pickup trucks. It is all over the place right now, and it's the stuff that keeps me awake at night. I don't stop thinking about it, and I don't stop working to make sure that we're doing everything possible in this country to protect this industry, and more importantly, the tens and tens of thousands of workers who depend on it, all across Ontario, but in other places too. And the reality is, the contagion effect, of course, is a reality, but these tariffs are going to cause such a problem for the industry that there'll be no way coming back from it, and U.S. workers will feel the brunt of this too. It's not possible to avoid unless the president pulls back right now.
Lana Payne, National President of Unifor, we always appreciate your time. Thanks for being here today.
Thanks, David.
Okay, we're going to turn back to our party insiders now. We've got Greg, we've got Fred, we've got Mel here. They're here to unpack the latest from the campaign trail, and we're going to take stock of where the race stands. But let's start with Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre, who's campaigning in southwestern Ontario on the front lines of President Trump's trade war. Poilievre laid out his economic platform this morning in St. Catharines, and tonight he's in Canada's auto capital, Windsor, for a rally.
All of these policies combined have been calculated to boost our GDP by $500 billion spread over the next 5 years. This will be like rocket fuel for our economy, causing money to pour back into factories, shipyards, new homes, business centers, and other places that generate paychecks for our people.
Poilievre is calling this the Canada First Economic Action Plan, taking a page from the book of his old boss, former Prime Minister Stephen Harper. The CBC's Marina von Stackelberg is covering the Conservative campaign. Marina.
Hey, David, we're at the port in St. Catharines, Ontario, a major shipping stop along the Welland Canal. Trade and the economy are top of mind of voters. And this is where Pierre Poilievre announced his economic action plan with policy he had previously unveiled. Now, he says it will be modeled on the plan that former Prime Minister Stephen Harper brought in to deal with the 2008 and 2009 economic crisis. Poilievre actually mentioned his former boss several times and the fact that he was a member of that previous government. Harper gave Poilievre his endorsement earlier this week. This is really an attempt to harken back to the last time the Conservatives were in power and a play on that government's management of the economy. But it comes as Harper's former Director of Communications continues to slam this campaign. Corey Teneycke, who also ran Ontario Premier Doug Ford's last campaigns, calls Poilievre's election campaign a disaster for having lost what was a massive lead in the polls over the Liberals just a few months ago. I asked Poilievre about that.
Liberals and lobbyists want me to stop talking about high food prices. Well, I'm not going to do that because single mothers shouldn't be going to bed hungry, worried about how they're going to feed their kids in the morning. They want me to stop talking about the doubling housing costs during the lost Liberal decade. I'm not going to stop talking about that. They want me to stop talking about the rampaging crime that's overtaking our streets and the overdose crisis Liberals caused that has taken the lives of 50,000 people. I will not stop talking about that either.
Poilievre was also questioned about local Conservative candidate Bas Simers. He has been part of an anti-abortion campaign in the past. The Conservative leader promised that if elected, his government would not pass any laws restricting abortion. He says that has been the party's policy for the last 2 decades and one that will be explicitly outlined in his election platform. David?
All right, thank you, Marina. This is CBC's Marina von Stackelberg in St. Catharines, Ontario. Now, meanwhile today, NDP leader Jagmeet Singh is making a new plea to Canadians. Instead of a bid to form government, Singh is asking voters to elect enough new Democrats to hold the government accountable. The NDP leader is in Ottawa today, where he spoke at the Broadbent Institute's annual conference, and reporters were there to ask Singh about this strategy.
For people who are worried about the cost of living, worried about groceries and homes, who are worried about losing their jobs and EI, the amount that you get just not being enough, the only party that's committed to making these things better for you are New Democrats. You got to send us to Ottawa if you want us to fight for you. And we've said this, and I really believe this, that Canada works best when we don't give all the power to one party. Have more New Democrats, have a strong number of New Democrats fighting for you in Ottawa, and you'll get better results for Canadians.
Okay, that's where we are at the end of week 3, and this is where we're going to begin with our party insiders, Fred Delory, Greg McEachern, and Melanie Richer. Okay, gang, we're going to do something a little bit different tonight to start off. We're going to go through a path to victory for a majority. We're going to talk about the Liberals and the Conservatives, Mel. We will get the NDP into the conversation, of course, but just not based on what the leader said on the majority thing. I'm not trying to be mean. I'm just explaining what's going on.
Talk about their path to
well,
official
look, Fred, save the snark now till later. All right, so look, I want this time next week, the advance polls are going to be open, and voters will be casting their votes. So we want to show you where things stand right now. These are the latest numbers from the CBC poll tracker. The Liberals, you can see they're just holding that consistent lead, right? 43.9% to 37.5%. The NDP at 8.5%. All the parties in single digits, which is normally where the bloc is because they're only running in one party. Okay, we're going to bring something new into the show today. You may have noticed a new monitor. Well, here's what's behind it. This is the election map we're going to use on election night to show you the results. That's obviously the blank slate that we'll start filling in on April 28th. This is how it looks right now. And you keen-eyed observers out there may notice things are a little bit different, like this is a Liberal seat in Saskatchewan. So let me explain what's happened here. You'll see it says 2023. What this is the new map, the 343 seats that will be in the House of Commons. We took the results from the time Canadians last voted, either in the 2021 election or in the by-elections that have happened since then, and we've transposed those votes, vote transposition across the new boundaries to show you more or less what it would look like. So this is why The Desnethe riding in Saskatchewan right now is Liberal because the way that it's been changed, if you look at how the vote went last time, it would have gone Liberal. So for this exercise, just bear that in mind. That's what you're seeing. So let's take a look at the state of the regions. Look at Atlantic Canada first, once this zooms in. Here we go. 4 provinces right now, there's 32 seats. It's 24 Liberal, 8 Conservative. Quick thoughts, Fred, starting with you on the state of play in this region.
Yeah, well, look, where the polls are, it's a tough sledding for us, but we need to add 4 to 8 seats to have that path to majority. Right now we have 120 seats going into this election. You need 172 for majority, so that's 52 seats we need to find across.
Okay, so it's grow here for the Conservatives. Greg, pretty much what? Hold and grow is what you're looking for, right? We'll get into specifics in a bit.
As much as I don't want to fly too close to the sun here, I would see a hold.
Okay, yeah, all right. Well, we're going to get to specific numbers. And Mel, there's no orange here right now, but if we get into Nova Scotia, I mean, we're talking down in the Halifax region, right? This is where the New Democrats will be targeting for gains, probably. Right?
Yeah, Halifax and St. John's East, which is Jack Harris's old seat.
Party President Mary Shortall's running there.
Exactly,
Labor leader,
former Labour leader. Both seats that Jagmeet has been to in this election campaign that he's gone to before the election, and that the NDP is putting resources and capacity behind.
Okay, all right, let's take a look at Quebec. We're going to get into some actual specific numbers. Look, this blue you see in Quebec, that's the Bloc. there is some Conservative blue in there, but on this map it's a little bit darker. We go into the island of Montreal. This is sort of the GTA of Quebec. You can see the Liberal strength there. That's Alexandre Boulay-Reece. That, of course, is Saint-Léonard-Verdun, which the Liberals lost in a by-election. You know, the battleground down here is going to be sort of these suburbs around the island of Montreal. This is where the majority comes from, Greg. If there is going to be a majority, this is the key one. This and Ontario, the key provinces for the Liberals.
Yeah, and I expect that next week you'll see a lot of heat from the Bloc because they're getting a bit panicked on this. But we had this week where I think the Conservative candidate in Quebec, there was a problem with what they filed, and so there won't be a Conservative candidate there.
So Jean-Yves Duclos might have a quickly.
He could lose his seat because of this, right? That blue vote could go to the other blue party. That nationalist one in Quebec City.
Becomes a binary.
Could be in trouble because of this.
Right, and Alexandre Boulay-Reece looking to hold on there for the NDP. Look, this is Ontario. The hopes and dreams of all the parties live there. Like you get to Boulay-Reece in a second. Just talk about Mr. Boulay-Reece in Quebec and what the NDP's hopes are in Ontario. Mel.
Yeah, I just wanted to add Ruth-Anne Brosseau in Berthier-Masquinongé.
She's back.
She is back.
I think she can win.
And if we hadn't seen the moment in the Quebec debate last year, or last election with Loi 21, we think that we could have brought Ruth Ellen back to Ottawa from the last debate. So I think that there's a really good opportunity there. The Conservative candidate, the last second, had to be pulled out because of some really problematic campaigning. So they're definitely putting all their resources there. And I think the French language debate is, Mark Carney's to lose, and that could, help Ruth Ellen and a few other NDP candidates in that riding. But Southwestern Ontario was the question you asked.
Well, so look, we got Ontario here, right? And look, a lot of dark blue. The rural parts are obviously Conservative, North Orange, and some red. But we'll go into the regions here and just quickly set the stage because we're going to do a deeper dive on numbers. But Southwest Ontario is where we just started the show talking about, right? Like from here, basically to here. That's auto sector, very trade exposed, very vulnerable. You got Windsor, you got London, you got the Kitcheners, you've got Hamilton down into St. Catherine in these areas. This is the three-way fights, right, in Ontario. So what is happening with Trump really affects this area. And then when we get into, well, let's just have a look at Toronto and the GTA, if I can get it to work. Look, this is why we call it vote-rich Ontario. This is Fortress Toronto, which the Liberals have always held. That, of course, is Toronto St. Paul's, which was the breach by the Conservatives. And then this 905, this is, the key battleground for the Conservatives.
It's what Doug Ford just cleaned up in Ontario, right?
Exactly.
We need to in this election.
Exactly. All right. So that's Ontario. We're going to get into the prairies now. It's going to look pretty consistent once I get the map working properly. Look, this is Manitoba. Blue in the rural, orange in the north. You get into Winnipeg, you got a mix of red and blue, red and orange, excuse me, and we'll see how that plays out. Saskatchewan, with the exception of Desnethe, is blue, but again, this in the last parliament was held. Gary Vidal was the Conservative MP. He's not running again. This got restructured, so this is all blue in the actual House of Commons, but just for the way the votes were transposed, we're looking at that. Of course, Alberta, the Conservative heartland, blue right now, but here are the key battlegrounds, the urban centers of Calgary, where there is one Liberal right now, and of course, up in Edmonton, the stronghold of the provincial NDP, you see a couple of federal NDP, Heather McPherson and Blake Desjardins, and then quickly the north is split 2-1. We get into British Columbia. We're going to spend a lot of time talking about this because, look, you've got orange in the north and on the island with a little bit of green down there. This is kind of the ball game, though. The lower mainland, the greater Vancouver area. You can see you've got blue, you've got red, you've got orange. This is more of a red-blue fight down here, and this is more of an orange-red-blue three-way battle up there. So that is where we are right now. For the Liberals to win, and we're going to start there, Greg, in our exercise on the majority, it's Atlantic Canada, Quebec, Ontario, and British Columbia. So we're going to get the magic finger going here with the pen, and we're going to click on the red color because we're going to talk about the Liberals for a little bit. So, Greg, let's look at this. We talked about Atlantic Canada. It's 24-8 for you right now. What is the number you need to see on election night from Atlantic Canada that has you feeling good on the path to majority on April 28th?
I promised myself I'd be small c conservative on these, but the campaign wants to see it has to be a hold. It's it's low 20s and it's 24 right now, so you need to see at least that coming out of there.
Okay.
And I remember working election night in 2011 where our numbers were nationally what they should have been in Atlantic Canada and a bit of Quebec. So it's a huge start.
Okay, so 24, we'll put that there. Is that where you want to stick with? That's the floor. 24 plus, that's what you're talking about there. Quebec, 78 seats in the new parliament. You have 32 right now with the transposition and the loss of La Salle-Verdun. What do you need to see in Quebec? What's
It has to be low 40s.
Low 40s? Okay.
So
I'm being very conservative. I am not going to eat crow.
That's 8 pickups.
Yeah, the Liberals are feeling really good, and the polling is looking really good, and the Bloc is bad.
Higher than that.
They're looking, Fred, you think they're higher than that?
I think they could be in the 50 range. The Bloc Québécois is going to...
Cochrane assigned math. I did math this afternoon.
Okay, so look, we've got 64 seats for the Liberals just in Atlantic Canada and Quebec before you get to Ontario. 122 seats in Ontario. Corey tonight has been telling us for weeks, Greg, that you're ahead by double digits there. Doug Ford, his pollster tells you that. You have 76 seats right now. What's the number you need to see?
Again, being very conservative here, but it's going to be around 80 before you start heading west.
Okay.
And
So
it's
80? 80 plus?
80 plus.
Okay, 80 plus. Okay, we're going to write it up here. Okay, so we get to the Manitoba border, and we are at 144 seats for the Liberals. That's your majority, guys, 172. So, Greg, you got to find 28 seats.
It's harder here.
It gets a whole lot harder.
Yeah.
This is where the math gets harder.
And like, this is a good message that there's still a lot of work to do.
Yeah, like, so, this is your traditional strongholds. You've rebounded here. So we get to Manitoba, 14 seats, 4 of them right now Liberals, 7 Conservative, and 3 New Democrats. What's your number in Manitoba?
Well, it's more across the prairies.
Sure.
And I was going to use my cheat sheets and apologize, but I look at, empty desk, empty mind, I guess, there, David. But, across the prairies, you're looking like they've got to have at least 10. And then there's
at least 10. Okay.
And there's some other reasons too. There has to be representation, Liberal representation from Saskatchewan. And I like your map.
Okay. Wow. This is a transposition. Okay. So we're going to say 1 in Saskatchewan. We're safe saying that.
I would say that there's a seat in play in Regina and a seat in play in Saskatoon.
I was in Regina earlier this week, and there was a lot of red signs actually in some of the parts. So I think that's
so is the NDP decision to saying they're going to get?
No. I'm saying the NDP's picking up Saskatoon. There was a lot a lot of red signs.
And there was always a complaint about Saskatchewan, the way the seats were carved up, that a lot of the Liberal vote wasn't as efficient because it was part, it might have been part of an urban-rural split.
Okay, so Greg, you want to go 10 across all 3. So that could be 5 in Manitoba, 1 here, 4 in Alberta, some combination of that. So that gets us to 154, 3 in the north, 2?
Sure.
Okay, so we're at 156. That means you need to win 16 seats in British Columbia. There are what? There's 43 seats in BC, 14 of them right now are Liberals, so you need to pick up 2. So it's 16 in BC, and that gets you there.
We're probably 18 to 20 in BC, based on some conversations I had with folks there.
Okay, quick thoughts on this. Anyone think these numbers are unbelievable? Too high, too low? Your thoughts,
Look,
Fred?
if the election was today, I think Quebec is one of those places where the Liberals could win a lot more than the 40 that's there. But again, the election's not today, so we'll see how the French debate goes and how things could shift.
Okay. Mel, your thoughts on that? Do
Yeah,
you think this is realistic right now?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
guess. The polling, again, the national polling and the riding by riding numbers are very different. So I'd be interested, like we would need like a regional breakdown of whose seats are you going to pick up, particularly in places like
Sure.
British Columbia and in Quebec. But yeah, that
But it shows you how tough it gets for the
totally,
Liberals once you get to Manitoba,
on the other side
right?
of Ontario.
All right, so Fred, because the majority plays are Liberal and Conservative, we're going to do your side now, get your projection. We're going to start in British Columbia. So 43 seats. Okay, we're going to go west-east here. I'm going to skip Ontario because I kind of want to do the math.
Skip Ontario.
Well, I'm going to end on Ontario.
Okay.
Because look, you're going to run up the score out here. You need some things to happen here, and then
All right, so
ball
for the
game is
show,
Ontario.
okay.
So let's look.
drama.
And I may have to change the color of this because the blue. We'll see. So let's look at British Columbia. 43 seats. You've got 15 right now. What's the number you think not what you expect to see? What, if you're going to win a majority government, you think you need to see in British Columbia?
21.
21. Okay. So we got 21 right there. 37 seats in Alberta. You own currently 34 of them after transposition. What do you need to see in Alberta?
36.
36. So you really need to grow there. Okay. 14 in Saskatchewan. 14?
Well, Disnethi's tough, and there is that Regina riding that I'd be very worried about. So I'd say 12 to be.
12? You would feel good with 12? Okay. This
I
is
mean, look, it sucks we've swept that province the last 2 elections in a row, so it
Yeah.
would not be great to lose seats there, but it's
right.
that's the math still works.
Okay, so you've got a nice run going here. You've got 69 before you get to Manitoba. What do you need in Manitoba? Right now, of the 14 seats there, you have 7.
8.
8? Okay, so that's 77 seats in Western Canada. A reminder, 172. So let's go to Quebec. Just jump over Ontario because that's the ball game. I just want to show what you need to have there. So Quebec, you have 10 of the 78 seats. What do you need to see coming out of Quebec?
10's a great number for Conservatives in Quebec, so hold it at 10.
10?
Now, we could win 2 more, but I'd say 10 is
Okay, so that's 87 seats. So then we go into the 32 in Atlantic Canada. You have 8. When Stephen Harper won this majority government, I think he had 11?
He had 11. I'd go with 10 for this one.
You go with 10. Okay, so Fred, that's 97 seats.
Yep. We need 75.
You need 75 in Ontario, and right now you have 41. That's a tough number.
That's a lot of rallies.
That has always been the path. The GTA, the Peel region, that has always been, there is no way we could ever get a majority without 70 plus seats in Ontario. It's 1/3 of the country.
Yeah.
It's, that's where the battleground is, Southwest Ontario and GTA. That's the fight. That's where all the resources are focused because that's where the bulk of the seats are.
Okay, so that's what it takes to get there. I mean, Mel, when you look at these numbers, 10 in the Atlantic, you know, that means Cliff Small holds, you pick up Jaime Batiste's seat maybe in Nova Scotia. Maybe you take Lawrence Macaulay's old seat as a Cavendish in Prince Edward Island. You
Sean
pick
Fraser,
up
where I wasn't able to beat him, but maybe
exactly.
Yeah,
they've been on a losing streak there since Fred ran. But this is the spot though, right? Like we're talking GTA breakthrough, Mississaugas, Brampton, all of York region, you know, 100%. Durham, the eastern thing. Yeah. You know, Mel, you know, when you look at, and I'm not trying to magnify the NDP's challenges, we're going to speak of that in a second, but Southwestern Ontario, challenge because of what's going on there and you know the ability to get back into the game in the heart of Toronto. What are your thoughts on the Conservatives and a path to 75 in Ontario?
That's a lot of pickups. That'll be hard for sure. And where the numbers are right now, I don't see it happening. And a lot of 3-way seats, so you need.
Used to be 3-way seats.
Well.
Right?
Well, I mean, historically,
but there has been a significant drop, and that
Yeah.
actually makes it harder for us in many areas because where's that vote going? It's not necessarily coming to us.
Like, I look at this, I think you could be a little bit higher there. You know, look, maybe you get one in the north, you know, so that maybe that lowers that to 74. Who knows? The northern ridings sometimes split strange. But, you know, that can get higher with vote splits in the lower mainland, you know, if the NDP come back and cause splits there.
If you're getting 75 in Ontario, you're getting more than 21 in British Columbia.
But this just sort of shows, Greg, the toughness of the Conservative position right now, right? When you're down 6 or 7 points at this stage in the campaign, your leader's polling below the party, and, you know, the ballot question has shifted so dramatically from when you developed your campaign plan. We're going to see Pierre Poilievre probably in the GTA for days and days and days on end.
Yeah.
And he may endorse the NDP, because
He's put out a few NDP policy pieces this week, not gonna lie. So.
But that's really what they need, right? Like that's part of the challenge for them is the collapse of the NDP vote has not been an asset to them.
Well, and the BQ vote, right? Because that puts your number at 40 and maybe higher, right?
Both, yeah.
Right. But so how then do you counter that, Greg, to make sure, because there are issues that are specifically difficult for the Liberals in the GTA, Gaza, for example, what happens with the Muslim vote, affordability and crime in the GTA. Like, what do you do to guard against the possibility of a 70-plus seat Conservative there?
Whatever I would have said before 5 o'clock Eastern today is now changed by listening to Lana Payne's interview with you. And it's very sobering to hear about the job losses at General Motors. And I think I said this 2 weeks ago about the start of the campaign. I understand that there are campaigns that you have to talk about other things. There are other issues. There's things you need to do. But I would hazard a guess that going into Easter, there's a lot of people in Ontario especially that are looking at things pretty closely about what's going to happen to their future financially. This is a huge impact. So I think it's real, everything is wrapped into that. You can talk about the tariffs, but it's the other impacts that Trump is doing on the worldwide economy that is impacting everybody, our retirement, our pensions, everything.
Yeah.
So,
BC is the least trade exposed province, but they trade heavily with Europe. And if China and Japan and Korea and everyone getting hit, the BC economy gets hammered, right?
So I'd answer that as opposed to countering something. There was criticism of Prime Minister Carney being the Prime Minister today and dealing with this. And again, things move so quickly right now. I think he, in retrospect, he did meeting with his Canada-U.S. committee is exactly what he should be doing right now.
And on the pure politics side of it, absolutely he should be.
Yeah.
This is an election right now, and when you're using your office to do this, you have things to do. There's major world issues and things that affect the country. You need to be doing. Premier Ford did it as well because he had to.
Right.
So let's just talk. I want to go back to southwestern Ontario. A lot of blue down there, right? Like Oxford is where Ingersoll is, right? And that's where the CAMI plant is. You get down to the Windsor area. There's kind of everybody is in play down there. London, there's auto plants all throughout this. Mel, I just wonder with the move Jagmeet Singh made this week, like his language was going there, right? Like it's been going there, and then the video came out last night, and then the formal pitch and explanation for it. I mean. How does that play? We'll talk about BC separately. How does that play here? Because, if people are afraid of what Trump is going to bring, do they run to Singh or do they go to Carney? Like, how do you see that potentially going? And I'll get Fred on that and what it means for the blue vote down there.
Right. I think if it is a too close to call election where nobody knows who's going to come out ahead, I think it's dangerous. What it's looking like right now is it's looking like Carney is potentially going to be Prime Minister after this. If that is what it looks like, we know that that's good for the NDP. And the reason that we know that that's good for the NDP is because people feel like they can vote for what they want. And folks really like dental care. They really liked the birth control and diabetes medication. And they generally, not just, in the last parliament, but in parliaments past with Tommy Douglas, with Ed Broadbent, they like what the NDP does to the Liberals, keeping them accountable, making sure that people are still part of their regular conversations. And that's what we saw in Jagmeet's pitch. So in those regions, I think it sends back NDP MPs to Ottawa.
How do they do that calculation if you're a voter down there? Like the polls are one thing.
Right.
Poilievre still has these rallies with thousands of people, so the physical manifestation of strength is there, even if the polling tells a slightly different story. How do those voters, with so much on the line, make that calculation that it's safe to vote maybe who they traditionally like versus who they think they need in this moment?
Right. I think you just have to tell people that it's a minority government is at play or a majority government is at play for the Liberals, and folks like NDP MPs in Ottawa keeping them accountable. And what's interesting, I can't remember if I talked about this last week, so I'm sorry if I'm repeating myself, but what was true in focus groups both on the island with orange-blue switch votes and in Ontario with orange-red switch votes was if folks thought that Mark Carney was going to be Prime Minister, in both those audiences, they said then we would vote for the NDP to keep them accountable. So I think that's what you need to play. And you need to go to those ridings. London is probably orange-red, Windsor West also, Hamilton also. But places where, it's NDP blue, like Essex or like I'm trying to think. There's another riding.
Windsor-Tecumseh and these sorts of places
Yeah,
down
like
there.
there's also a pitch there to say, if you want to beat the Conservatives in this riding, it's not actually the red team that's up and fighting. It's the NDP, and there's a lot of those ridings in Canada, and I think that that's also part of that strategic vote message.
So Fred, on that, I mean, there's the challenge for the NDP trying to sort of sustain critical mass right now is really Jagmeet Singh's pitch, you know, and viability and relevance to the parliament. But down there, this 80 number that Greg says would make him very comfortable if that's what the Liberals got in Ontario.
They have to pick up 2, 3 seats?
They need to pick up like 4, but like that could go a lot higher if the NDP Liberal vote coalesces in Auto country, right? So what are you watching for sort of in that as you get down near Detroit, for example?
Go back to the 2015 election when the NDP were the official opposition going into that. They had around 100 seats or close to it. And that was a message that they were they coalesced behind us to get rid of the Conservatives then, and it went the other way. It was the Liberals. A lot of ridings, and the riding I ran in against Sean Fraser, the NDP disappeared off the ballot, and it went right to the Liberals. And that is the risk that we have in those areas, is that if it coalesces behind one, because vote splits is what helps Conservatives in so many seats, particularly in Ontario. And if that split disappears, it makes the path very, very narrow.
So what's your sense of that in this moment? Like you worked on Doug Ford's campaign, right? You know, and we're part of that. I mean, I have not looked at the provincial map, but I mean, Doug Ford's majority is quite large. I would assume in the auto sector he did very well.
80 seats.
It's in the 80 seats range. So when you look at how people in that part of Ontario voted for Doug Ford on this issue, what's your sense of how it might happen when it's Pierre Poilievre, Mark Carney, or Jagmeet Singh?
It comes down to what's the narrative, what's the message, who is going to be, which leader is going to form the government that will fight for these issues and that understands these issues. And that's why the Trump tariff thing has always been the ballot question for all of these swing seats. And the Conservatives are slowly sometimes adapting to it and then walking away from it at times and then coming back. We need to really focus in the next 2 weeks on this issue if we want to be able to turn this around.
Craig, what's your sense? I mean, I'm not going to say it's the only issue of the Carney campaign, but it's the main issue of the Carney campaign, right? Like they are talking about other things, but those are at a tier below. It's all about Donald Trump, and I'm the guy to deal with Donald Trump, right? So when you look at, they can get to your 80 number by largely holding serve, winning back Toronto St. Paul, picking off here or there, but this is where they could really drive it into a whole new level of locking down a majority.
Yeah, and these were seats that, pre the right aligning that Liberals have held. MPs like Rosemary and Paul Steckley come to mind. So there is, it's been a while, probably pre-2004, since Liberals held some of those seats. But there are people there that have worked on campaigns, have been on successful campaigns. The challenge with an outside force determining what our election is about, we saw in 2015 with the refugees and that very sad scene on a beach.
Alan Kurdi on the Turkish beach.
So sometimes I don't think any of us are really in control of this message, but as Fred said, the Conservatives don't seem to. I'm so tired of hearing the word pivot because it doesn't stick, and they keep throwing things to see what sticks, and nothing is sticking, so they keep throwing other things out, and then they keep recycling things. Where you have Carney, and all the times I sat across from Fred and he talked about the inability of Liberals to have a consistent narrative. Well, there is a narrative here because it's being served up and it's, financial, a crisis. So, it is, I think Fred said this really well last week about the ability to follow what the campaign issue is instead of trying to invent one or reinvent one that you would have used in September of last year.
Yeah. So look, I want to look a little bit at British Columbia, right? Because this is the other big three-way race. ML, this is big, right? For the NDP with this, wanting to hold on to party status and as many of the seats that they hold as they can with the way this election has gone. 43 seats, 13 of them New Democrats. You got one in the north, one in the southern interior, none in the Fraser Valley, 3 in the lower mainland, 2 in Vancouver itself, and 6 on Vancouver Island. How do you think this appeal plays out there? Because what you hear a lot of with British Columbia is that, in the old days when you couldn't watch the election in real time, they'd say, oh, it's already decided before we come on. This doesn't suggest it's going to be decided before we get the results from BC. And if there's a move for like a majority government one way or another, that is risky for the New Democrats. So how do you see this new pitch playing out there?
Well, the interesting thing for most of the seats in British Columbia is none of them are three-way races for the NDP. So it's either orange-red in Lower Mainland, or it's orange-blue in the north and on the island, except for maybe Victoria and Saanich. Esquimalt, Sooke, is probably orange-red as well, and maybe a little bit.
A bit of the Tri-City areas, though, Port Moody, Port Coquitlam.
Maybe in Nanaimo, but otherwise, like Gord John seat, orange-blue. Alistair McGregor, orange-blue. Who else am I missing? Rachel Blaney, orange-blue. Rachel Blaney's obviously not running again. Those seats are two-way races, and a lot of them in the Lower Mainland and up north are too. So I think that is helpful. The other thing that I would say is incumbency matters, and I don't want to sound like a broken record, and I don't want it to seem like this is the thing that I'm desperately holding on to, but New Democrats know where their vote is. They know how to speak to those folks, and they know how to get them. And what I'm told is in all of our incumbencies, we have largely surpassed the contact rate with folks, and there's been more sign requests and bigger funds coming in than 2021. So those are good signs. Obviously, that doesn't show up in the national polling, and of course, that's still, if election day is, I don't know if it's going to be Carney, I don't know if it's going to be Poilievre, that could still hurt. But what I'm hearing from folks that I spoke to, like Taylor Buckrock and like Gord Johns, is that they feel good because they are hearing good things and they're talking to a lot of people. So I'm going to believe that and think that that's going to be good news for the NDP to hold those seats come election day.
Yeah, and like, Liberals who are leading in the polls out there, Fred, like they even say, like, look, Don Davies, I know the polls might suggest in a seat they're going to take him out, but they're kind of like, Don Davies is going to be really, I'm not saying that's my point. Very, very difficult. Like
Peter Stauffer never lost his seat, right? He did.
He did.
He was incredibly popular. When it comes down to an election like this, when you're looking at who the choices are.
But it's not a change election in the same way.
But in a sense it is, right? Like if you look at Ford, he was able to win, and the NDP held their seats despite their popular vote collapsing. This election, people are voting, who do you want to be Prime Minister? Poilievre or Carney? And I think that squeezes the NDP almost everywhere. I think like they would be very, very disappointed in the election.
Fred's going to buy me a drink after the election when he's very wrong.
Well, look, just waves are very unpredictable, right? Like, you go back to the orange wave in 2011, right? Well, and you mentioned Jack Harris in St. John's East. In 2015, I covered Jack Harris when Brian Tobin was going to sweep the province and Jack won. And then Danny Williams is going to sweep the province and Jack won. And then Justin Trudeau swept the province and Jack lost. Well, right? And that was just boom.
I think that's actually the election where we met, because I was doing the provincial election that was like 3 days after the federal. And everywhere we went, when people were like, why are you here? I'd be like, oh, well, I'm here to help the NDP in the provincial election. And everybody said, oh, too bad about Jack. I wish he would have won. And I said, well, did you vote for him? No. So it would be like, well, this is how these things happen. So I do get those points, but I think it'll be okay.
And because St. John's is a small place, Jack Harrison went to school with my dad, and he was my dad's lawyer for a while. Greg, your thoughts on British Columbia? Because look, 16 there, that's growth from the 14. I remember in the 2021 election, the 14 seats the Liberals came out of there with, I think, surprised a lot of people.
They lost by 5 percentage points popular vote.
And grew in seats. And part of what, and you were running the Conservative campaign, it was the COVID outbreak in Alberta late in the campaign that had a lot of people in BC go, whew, at least that's what some Liberals were suggesting, and it might have done it. But how do you see this affecting things in terms of, can you get into play on the island, for example? I mean, I think the last time Victoria was Liberal was David Anderson, and that is not yesterday when he was there. What are your hopes and dreams for Vancouver Island, other than maybe retirement down the road?
and I know some lovely people there, but I think Mel's summary of what the race is on the island is pretty accurate, in terms of blue-orange. But the other big takeaway is, before I get to that, is, if this was December, I would have written off BC for the Liberals.
That is a whole different.
This whole map.
None of these numbers make sense in December.
Toronto, Halifax, St.
We would have a majority by Ontario. We wouldn't have to get to
Kelowna, Steve Furr is running. He won in 2015. He's a former fighter pilot, chair of Defense Committee, and he's running in this election. And something interesting, we haven't talked about the People's Party. I don't know if we really have to, but the People's Party candidate there this week, according to local media, decided not to run. And if you look at the seat projections, Kelowna is now in play again. So what I'd be watching for is if you see Mark Carney head to BC, those seats are really in play.
Yeah, and well, it took him a while to get there because of like Trump, but he spent a couple of days there this week. But like Fred, going back to your point in December, you know, I remember going through the Atlantic seats with my contacts, you know, back home and everything. You're 10, you might have gotten that in Nova Scotia. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
In December, you were probably going to get 5 in Newfoundland. You know, so you're looking at and maybe even
8 in New Brunswick,
you're like
and 4 in
15,
PEI.
23, 20. You might have had 27 in Atlantic. 10 to 15 in Quebec, maybe.
Probably the
You know,
same
the
number.
block might have come up.
Well,
who knows?
We could have caught fire maybe and
But that would be very realistic in Ontario, the 75.
It'd be low.
It might be low back then, right? Yeah, so this goes to show you just how much this has also dramatically changed, right? In terms of how much Freeland's resignation, which we were all here for, I think on the 16th of December, Trudeau's resignation, Trump's inauguration, the start of the trade war, and just the entire evisceration of the issue set has turned this into a far more competitive map.
we should have had an election in the fall. That would have been,
Agreed.
would have been a great time.
So on that, like Mel, let me go back to this because of the NDP and the call this week. Do you think there's regret there? Because they were in a better position in October and November. Now, I know the Conservatives were running ads and verbally abusing Mr. Singh and all of these things and not doing really anything to make friends in Parliament of like, let's get together and because it's in our best interest. But Mr. Blanchet, same thing. Pierre Poilievre stands to do far worse than he would have if he'd gotten his way back then. But maybe so do Mr. Blanchet and Mr. Singh with this dynamic. Do you think there's any regret in sticking with the plan, or? I guess you got to make the decision in the moment, though, right?
Yeah, you need to make the decision in the moment. I think there's going to be a lot of hindsight, and you know, hindsight is hindsight. And I think there will probably be a lot of reflections of, you know, the deal was good, but it was good until how long? Do we stay too long? What does that look like? At the end of the day, I think most New Democrats would say that a country run by Pierre Poilievre is worse than a country run by Mark Carney. So that too is hard to say what folks think. After Election Day, and I think that's also one of the problems that we're up against right now. When the question of strategic voting comes up, I think a lot of folks genuinely believe that, and a lot of New Democrats are in it because they want to make our country better and not because they want to win, which I want everybody to win because I think that, or I want New Democrats to win because I think that that's the only way that we do the things that we want to do is by winning. But I do think that those are all considerations that were thought about at the time. And dental care is something that, you know, New Democrats will be proud of for a really, really long time, and you needed to make sure that actually stuck. So all those things are things that were considered. But yeah, I think there's probably a few reflections eventually of did we wait too long and what does that mean? And I think that that's natural for all parties after an election.
But you know, Greg, we look at this and somehow a former central banker who started his career at Goldman Sachs has become the safety raft for New Democrat voters and former sovereignty voters, you know, Quebec nationalists. And, you know, I don't know if the majority is inevitable or not. It is the suggested outcome right now based on all the top-line public opinion polling. But how do you think what we saw from Mr. Singh affects the thought process for are you with Fred that it's voting for Prime Minister and it may not affect it, or do you think people might feel it's comfortable and they want to give the NDP a check against the Liberals?
No, I'd agree with Fred that they're voting for Prime Minister. I'd go further back to Goldman Sachs. You know, come on, this guy grew up in Edmonton. How far back do you want to go here?
It's not the resume most New Democrats look for.
In any other election, he would be our perfect candidate on a daily basis.
I'm shilling for some seats in Alberta here. But you know, to Mel's point about the regrets, I mean, the Conservatives are going to have some regrets here. Perhaps they were, if they had actually worked with another opposition party, they could have had the election that they were calling for so long. And I'll play that game on my own party.
Yeah.
How unpopular is Pierre Poilievre when you put him up against, you know, Mark Carney? What comes up? His likability. Justin Trudeau said in an interview with a Liberal MP, I could have done ads, but I chose not to. And again, they did not define Poilievre when they had the chance to in 2022. And you know, one of the things I don't think is working for Poilievre is when he talks about the 10 years. Because what he's forgetting is there's a lot of Canadians that voted Liberal in 2015, not as many in 19 and 21, but still a lot did. Where the anger and the frustration starts is around 2022. So I don't think that message works on anybody else unless you've been angry at Liberals for 10 years.
Right.
But the Liberals could have done something sooner on this too.
Yeah, no, I think there's no question about that. But I mean, you know, we are where we are. And look, we've got, 2 weeks and 3 days, about 17 days left in this campaign. April 28th is coming fast. So look, this is projection, estimation, threshold, guessing.
There's not projection, just to be. This is
No. I think Greg's our projection right now. I'm just going to go out on a limb, but we're gonna hold you to this and hold you accountable. But look, you know, this is me finger writing on a board. 2.5 weeks left. Just quick, what are you watching for, Fred, in terms of something that could change the course of this campaign?
Look, my experience, national campaign manager last election, we were winning right up into the last 3 days. The bottom fell out on us when COVID spiked again and when Jason Kenney shut down Alberta and locked it down. It became the national story for 3 days, hard on COVID. And our own supporters felt we didn't take COVID seriously enough and it killed us. Events could happen, something could happen. The biggest event is Trump, and every party needs a solid message that they can get out. There's all these others, there's a million issues to talk about, but the most volatile part of the electorate is Trump-focused. And if you're not hitting on that chord, you're not winning.
Greg?
So I know there's a lot of talk about the debates, and I remember the very famous Corey Tonight quote, I think it was, about if Justin Trudeau came up with pants on. Don't mess around with expectations on that. I think Carney did a good job. Chef saying, my French is at 6 out of 10. I think he's set the table on that. What I'd also be worried about is what happened in 2008. There was a long weekend, Thanksgiving, and a lot of conversations around whether or not Stéphane Dion had the stuff. And the polls dropped for the Liberals right after that. So not only is there the debates, there is a long weekend where a lot of people are going to gather with family and friends. And if you track things like trust, word of mouth, your friend's opinion, your family opinion still matters an awful lot.
Yeah, it's unique from that perspective.
Oh, sorry, yeah.
So I was just saying it's unique with the holiday.
Yeah. It's another variable in an election full of them. Mel, what are you watching for?
I'm really looking closely to the French debate. I think you can really, I hear you on the French language. I don't think people are worried about him not being able to speak in French. I think what people are worried about is he doesn't understand Quebecers. And at Chef, it seemed like he wasn't understanding what he was being asked. And the ability to connect to culture and the ability to understand what the Quebec situation is different. I think that's where it could get hairy, and it could get hairy quickly, particularly with somebody like going up against Blanchet. Yeah. And I think that is something to watch for. I think it's what does the message look like in the last two weeks. I think what we were hearing Poilievre say about Carney and Trump, to me it seemed like loser talk. It seemed like I questioning what Carney is doing up against Trump. I don't think anybody has capacity to hear that right now. I think you need to talk about Trump in a different way. And for New Democrats, I think you need to, the message we heard from Jagmeet today, what he said at that podium at Broadbent, I think you need to say it in every corner that you're going to until Election Day, and that's what will help New Democrats pull their vote.
See, I actually think the English debate might matter more, because I think the Liberals have a floor in Quebec that is in the 30s. Poilievre needs to raise the ceiling in Ontario and maybe in Atlantic Canada, and the English debate is where he can do that. Yeah. But it's also where if he goes too hard, you don't know what it does. It could lock things in for Carney.
I think if he doesn't show up looking prime ministerial, which he hasn't shown us he can do yet, I think, see ya. I think it's going to be tough.
Yeah. All right. So this is it's fun to play with the toys. And look, I got to tell you, Greg and Fred are going to be back next week. Mel's saying goodbye for the rest of the election campaign because she's putting her money where her mouth is, and she is going to go join the NDP campaign for the duration and try to help Jagmeet Singh sell that message. So Mel, we're going to miss you. Good luck, and the chair will be there the minute you're ready to come back. And we will continue, of course, with our Friday panel. We have people like Jordan Likeness, Cheryl Oates, and others who will fill in for Mel until she's ready to come back. All right, we're going to say goodbye there. You're going to go start your weekend. Fred Delory, Greg McEachern, and Melanie Richer. Still lots more to come here on Power and Politics. Just ahead, is the NDP throwing in the towel? We're going to talk to the party's campaign spokesperson, not Mel, but we're going to talk to the spokesperson about the endgame strategy. Plus, we'll dig into some new data on the impact Donald Trump's policies have had on the U.S. auto industry and what that means for Canada. And we'll recap the key moments from week 3 of the campaign trail with our weekly wrap. Want to catch up with Power and Politics while you're on the go? Then check out and follow our daily podcast. I'm David Cochrane. The Power and Politics podcast starts now. where I speak to the key players in the political stories that everyone is talking about. You can find the latest episode on the CBC Listen app or wherever you get your podcasts. Well, it became fairly clear today that NDP leader Jagmeet Singh is no longer running to be Prime Minister. Instead, the NDP is asking to be the party to hold the government accountable.
If you want someone to hold government to account, if you want someone that's going to fight to make things happen for working class people, for middle class people, that's what we have done in the past. That's what we have done as a party. And you'll need that now more than ever. Who's going to fight back against Mark Carney's cuts? No party should have all the power. Having New Democrats there and holding government to account will mean that Canadians would be better off.
The CBC poll tracker is projecting that the NDP getting just 5 seats if the election were held today, a very low number given the party held 24 seats when Parliament was dissolved. So where does the NDP need to go and what does it need to do to kind of save itself from that outcome? Well, Anne McGrath is the campaign spokesperson for the New Democrats and she's here in the studio. Anne, it's good to see you. Thanks for coming in. I know you will quibble with the 5. You think you're going to be much higher than that, but I just want to go through the message from Jagmeet Singh. It appears to me essentially making the pitch for a Mark Carney minority government and as many New Democrats as possible. Is that the end game here after today?
We are, like Jagmeet's video yesterday and his speech today at the Broadband Institute is kind of setting up the closing argument. We're heading into the debates next week and the kind of end game of this election. I know it seems interminable, but that's where we're headed now. And I think what he is doing is he is reaching into our history, into our party's history, and the things that we have done that make us that we have contributed to that make us Canadian. We're in a moment right now where people are very, very patriotic, feeling very patriotic primarily because of the threats from Trump and the Trump tariffs and that kind of thing. So we're feeling very much like we want to assert our Canadianness. And when you ask people what makes us different from the United States, it is often, it is things like public health care, public pensions, employment insurance, things that are very associated with the NDP. And now most recently, the biggest expansion in Medicare ever with the dental and the introduction of pharmacare. So I think it's like pointing out that those things would not happen without us.
Sure.
We're the ones that pushed those. We're the ones that made those things. Jack Layton used to say when people asked him, what's the difference between the United States and Canada? And his answer was the NDP.
Look, I get the argument for a New Democrat vote, but I'm trying to translate, I guess, what Mr. Singh is essentially saying, his preferred outcome. I mean, obviously his preferred outcome is he's Prime Minister and you have a majority government, but like I think, that ship sailed very clearly with what he's saying. So he says he'd never support a Poilievre government. You clearly do not want a Conservative majority. And you doesn't sound like you want a Liberal majority right now. So is it Liberal minority with New Democrats in some situation where it becomes like it was before and after supplying confidence?
That's certainly a very possible outcome. And so in that scenario, we would argue that the more NDP MPs you have, the better it is for you. And, I think that the other thing is that the situation has changed substantially in the last couple of months, right? So like 2 months ago, maybe, it was almost inevitable that Pierre Poilievre was going to be the Prime Minister and that there would be a Conservative majority. We would have fought hard against it, but that was where we were going. I think that is very unlikely now, according to, not just the pollsters, but like what people are saying on the doors and that kind of thing. And New Democrats feel very compelled by the need to keep Pierre Poilievre out, to keep the Conservatives out. But he is not going to win now. It is not going to happen. So I think that it gives New Democrat voters a kind of a level of permission to move away from Carney and back towards their natural home in the NDP.
That's the kind of strategic voting and analysis of things I think you can do and I can do. And we just did a whole segment with a map about how that potentially works. But does the auto worker face a temporary shutdown that could become a permanent shutdown? Get to that level of comfort? Does a progressive who wants to stop Mr. Poilievre but sees these massive thousands of people at his rallies take the comfort that, the Carney thing is an inevitability? It seems like a level of strategic chess you're kind of counting on voters doing in an election that is where the Trump chaos is kind of driving everything.
What I'm really counting on them doing is voting with their values. I'm counting on them recognizing the role that the NDP has played in the political history and landscape of this country, and looking at the things that they have, that the NDP has achieved. And I'm also looking at so many incumbent seats where the people in those communities really value their NDP representation, because they know that those incumbents are fighters for their communities, they're rooted in their communities. And I know that we're looking at polling aggregators and those kinds of things, but certainly those aggregators didn't really capture that level of local support that we saw, for instance, in the Ontario campaign. It doesn't kind of capture it. It's a kind of an overall thing, but it doesn't look at the fact that in, for instance, Vancouver Kingsway, Don Davies is very, very popular, or that Gord Johns and Courtney Alberni is very, very popular, or Heather McPherson in Edmonton Strathcona. It's very hard to see, like if you look at Alberta, there is a very strong NDP vote, but it's concentrated. It's not spread across the province.
Look, there are pockets of that in individual ridings, but as a party, it's kind of spread out all over the place, but about half of your caucus is in British Columbia. And I wonder, though, Ann, the debates haven't even happened, and this is the pitch Mr. Singh has to make. This is his third election. I mean, what does this say about his ability as a leader? that in his third national campaign going up against two rookie leaders on the national stage, that this is the situation that the Democrats find themselves in?
Well, I think he's been a very, very effective leader. As a matter of fact, I think he will stand out as one of the great leaders in NDP history, that's for sure, because he is
electorally or just in the policy side of things?
I'm talking about the things that we've been able to accomplish, like dental care and pharmacare and what he did during the pandemic. I think he has been a really remarkable leader in that way. And, you know, we care about electoral results, obviously, but Tommy Douglas never achieved great electoral results, and yet he was voted as the greatest Canadian. So, you know, I think that we are motivated by electoral success, but we are also very motivated by our values and our priorities, and I think we're very connected. As I said, in the ridings where we represent a constituency, we are very well connected and very strong fighters, and people appreciate that. And we saw that, as I said, most recently in the Ontario election, where we were being told in that election that we were going to be wiped out, we were going to lose party status, and our leader was going to lose her seat. Right. Which is what we're hearing right now about the federal NDP.
Well, the Ontario NDP came, third in vote, but second in seats. And I noticed they're not complaining about first past the post, and that's just an interesting novelty there. But look, Justin Trudeau won 3 national elections, a majority, 2 minorities. He brought in a bunch of policy, and it got to the point where he just got forced out by circumstances and his own caucus. I mean, what does it take for Jagmeet Singh to stay on here as leader? I think 5 is probably low. I think you're going to finish higher than 5 seats. I don't know, based on what I'm seeing, and even with the strong local candidates, you get the party status at this point. I think that is still a question with 2 weeks to go. What's the bar for Jagmeet Singh to stay?
I don't think that that's a discussion that New Democrats are having right now. I think that people are very, very happy with his leadership. They're very happy with the things that we've accomplished, and I think that they're going to really like this messaging as we head into the final days of the campaign. I was at the speech today, and those were all progressive, progressive leaders in a variety of different sectors, and they were delighted by that speech.
Okay, so there are kind of 2 big inflection points on the schedule of this campaign. I have to make it clear on the schedule, because a lot of things happen. What do you need to see happen in the French debate and the English debate next week for your argument to go home? I mean, does Mark Carney need to crater? Does Jagmeet Singh need to shine? I mean, what do you need to see in these contests?
I think what we need to see is a strong appeal to Canadians to consider their values, to look at what we've been able to achieve, and to recognize that the more NDP MPs you have in Parliament, the better it is for you and for your community and for your family.
What happens if you don't get to party status? Like, what if the aggregators are broadly right and it is below the 12 that you need?
I don't know that I'm willing to concede any of that at the moment, so and speculate on that. So I would say that we're going to fight hard for every single vote that we can get, and we're going to fight hard for every single seat we can get, and that it will be better for those people who manage to have an elected NDP MP in their ridings.
Okay. Anne McGrath, campaign spokesperson for the federal New Democrats. It's good to see you. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
All right, we're learning just how painful President Trump's auto tariffs could be, and not just for Canada. Those new numbers are coming up next. New data is estimating the potential impact of Trump's 25% tariff on imported parts and vehicles. It estimates the tariffs will cost automakers in the U.S. $107.7 billion and affect almost 17.7 million vehicles. To break down the numbers and the fallout of those numbers, Brian Kingston is the president and the CEO of the Canadian Vehicle Manufacturers Association. Brian, it's getting to be a regular thing, unfortunately for you and your sector, but thanks for coming in. So look, $108 billion in round numbers, that's a lot of money. I mean, what does that mean for auto plants, for workers, for your sector?
So this estimate is based off the tariffs being put in place on vehicles and parts, and the cost will be borne largely by American automakers. So Ford, General Motors, and Stellantis, of that $108 billion, $42 billion of that additional cost will be applied to them. So it really questions, the White House appears to be wanting to strengthen the U.S. manufacturing base by going forward with this tariff policy, but in fact, what they're doing is weakening it, because you're going to put costs throughout the supply chain. Vehicle prices will go up by thousands and thousands of dollars. And we're now seeing estimates that new vehicle sales in the U.S. and Canada could decline this year, just this year, by almost 2 million vehicles, which is devastating for the industry. And that means lower production levels, less jobs. So hard to see what the end game is here, given how much cost is going to be put on the industry.
Okay, the $108 billion, that's if they go in on the tariffs across the border a bunch of times to go into the cars and the cars and light-duty trucks. That's a cost they would bear permanently if they continue the operations as they are. They could get around that by doing what Donald Trump wants them to do, right? By moving everything to the U.S. There's capital costs and startup costs with that. Does that become part of the value equation that the industry has to start thinking about?
I don't think so, just simply because the cost of doing that to avoid the tariff of importing is so significant. 10 million vehicles built in the U.S., 16 million consumed. The cost associated with bringing all of that into the U.S. is so high. On top of that, tariffs are expected to go in force on parts. So even if you had a facility solely located in the United States, there is simply no way to build a vehicle right now with 100% American parts and components. So you're still going to face those tariffs on all of the back and forth on parts. And then, of course, we've now learned that we have a tariff of, I think we're at 145% on China, getting higher, it seems like, on a daily basis. Yeah. And the reality is, particularly in the EV supply chain, China controls about 80% of the battery supply chain globally. Costs are going to go up because of that as well. So this all means a less competitive North American industry.
So 2 million fewer cars, you said 10 million made in the U.S., 16 million consumed. So that's like 1/8 of the sales market that goes away. I mean, what does this mean for jobs? What does this mean for operations? Because this is a big loss to ask the sector to eat.
Well, it's just massive. And, automotive it's a capital-intensive sector with long time horizons and low profit margins. So if you're going to put this cost on industry, the only outcome is higher prices and therefore less consumer demand. And that translates to less production. Automakers build to the demand that they see in the market, and if you're starting to see a pullback on that, and then add on top of that a potential recession, which seems to be increasingly likely, and you've got a bad situation for automakers, not just in the U.S., but of course Canada and Mexico, because we're all integrated.
Yeah, well, if nobody's making money, nobody can buy a new car, right? They push it off. You shove off that decision. But just as a thought exercise, what the president wants to do, right? To move it all into the U.S. He wants to sort of pursue this 20th century industrial policy. Even if you had the capital and the time to do it, do they even have a labor pool that could do this when you consider they're cracking down on immigration, they're deporting a lot of people who do jobs at the bottom of the economic ladder? Are there even enough Americans to do these manufacturing things he wants to do?
You won't have the people. On top of that, not every plant is as efficient as the next one, right? And if you look at the Canadian labor force, Canadian plants are known to be highly efficient with a highly skilled labor force. So even if you were going to pursue this policy right to the end, you cannot build these facilities in time, get the people, the skilled labor in place to make it actually happen. Meanwhile, China is building a massive automotive industry. You're going to have competition from around the world, and we're going to go into that fight globally with one hand tied behind our back because Canada and Mexico have been cut out of the equation. It doesn't make sense.
Okay, so on that and on the transition, I know we've talked in the past about the challenges with the EV mandates as they exist and the lack of charging infrastructure and incentives in these things. General Motors, its Cami assembly plant, shut down, repurposing, reopening, much smaller workforce, and it's because of the lack of sales and the changes in EV mandates. What does this say, beyond just the Ingersoll situation, just for that transition, for that industry, for the big industrial deals with Stellantis and Volkswagen and battery plants? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, well, there's no doubt that the transition is not going as smoothly as anticipated. Even just a few years ago, when you looked at some of the investments that were being made, it was on this premise that we were going to see mass adoption occurring at a pretty rapid pace. That is not playing out. And there's been a lot of changing government policy in the U.S., of course, but even in Canada, we had an incentive to purchase vehicles. It disappeared overnight. That has an immediate impact on demand. So the industry is still electrifying. This is absolutely the path forward. And these plants that we have, you look at the plant, the CAMI plant, that is the only plant in the world that is building that product. That product is in demand. It's just not in demand at levels that were anticipated.
It's a volume issue.
It's a volume issue. So I'm confident in the transition, but we do need consistent policies from government on this. I mean, the federal government has mandated 20% EV sales next year. They just fell to 8% last month. This is a fantasy. There is just no way to hit these targets, and these mandates are going to have all sorts of negative impacts on manufacturers. So we need to rethink it. And when it comes to things like procurement, the federal government has said that 80% of the federal fleet should be green, zero-emission vehicles by 2030. The Auditor General's report on this recently found that 3% of the federal fleet was electric. Meanwhile, we've got a plant right here in Canada building the exact type of vehicle that government should be purchasing. So we've got to get our act together on this stuff and actually have a consistent set of policies.
A 77 percentage point gap on that mandate is quite the gap to kind of close in a couple of years. But I just wonder, like, EV mandates are probably necessary in some form to get there. Whether the time frame is, I guess, realistic is part of the question. I mean, whoever wins this election, if they do pursue this transition, what's the one big change you want to see from government to help with this transition and maybe help a plant like the CAMI plant tool back up?
Well, first of all, the mandates have to go. They don't make sense. And the reason that they were introduced years ago and largely pioneered by California, there was a time where you didn't have electric vehicles in market. In Canada in 2012, there were 3 models. Now there's over 100. So this whole concept of choice and supply, that has been dealt with. If you want an EV, it's there. We need to focus on the demand side of things. So I'm interested to see what are parties saying about charging infrastructure. Can we incentivize the purchase? It's still the early days in this transition. It sure does help a consumer make that switch. So those are the types of ideas. And even the idea that was put out by the Conservatives recently about incentivizing purchases of Canadian-built vehicles by removing the GST, right? These are smart policies that can support our industry, that can help with electrification, and they don't penalize companies that are trying to make this transition but can't hit these arbitrary targets.
Yeah, the NDP is pitching that too. I have to say that or they're going to yell at me. But basically what you said, the mandate is too much stick, incentives and these things, more carrot. That's where it probably needs to go if we're going to do this transition well in this country?
Absolutely. I mean, if there's one thing we've learned, that generally Canadians and customers don't want to be told by government what you can buy. You're going to go buy a vehicle that meets your needs, whatever those needs may be. The auto industry is going to deliver the product. There are so many options out there now, but you definitely don't want government forcing you. And, as these mandates get tighter and tighter, that is the outcome. It will get to a point where you could go to a dealership and because of the federal mandate, the dealer will not be able to sell you a gas-powered vehicle. That's a bad outcome. That's bad for electrification because you could imagine the blowback. Someone would be upset by that and actually not want to transition to electric. So I think we've got to get our hands around that policy.
All right. Brian Kingston, until the next crisis or maybe the next solution in your sector, we'll say goodbye. That's Brian Kingston, President and CEO of the Canadian Vehicle Manufacturers Association. All right, up next, we're going to recap the key moments from week 3 of the campaign trail with our weekly wrap. Don't go away. We are more than halfway through this election campaign, and all the major polls have aligned to point to a Liberal lead. But this week, there is a battle between what those polls suggest versus what the pictures on the campaign trail show. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre, well, he sparred with journalists about what the turnout at his rallies say about his support. Liberal leader Mark Carney, he made his own show of force with a rally in the Conservative heartland. And two parties, well, they threw in the towel on forming government and made direct appeals to voters to elect more of their MPs. So what does all of this mean for the Conservatives' chances in an election that's just over 2 weeks away? Well, our weekly wrap is back to break down the biggest moments. Joining me is Michael Solberg. He, of course, is a former staffer in the Stephen Harper government. Zane Velji is a former strategist for the Alberta NDP. And here with me in the studio, Laura D'Angelo was an advisor to former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Okay, we referenced the Conservatives there because our poll tracker shows the Conservatives 6 points behind the Liberals, but Pierre Poilievre is dismissing the polling deficit and instead focusing on the size of his rallies. On Tuesday, Poilievre had this exchange with the Globe and Mail's Laura Stone.
How many people do you think we had last night?
Thousands.
Well, that's pretty obvious. I think you can be more precise than that.
I don't. I mean, the party said 10,000 registered. There's reports of 15. I really can't say.
One last question. When was the last time we had a rally that big in Canada?
I don't know. I've never been to one, a political rally that big, I don't think.
You know a lot about politics.
Well,
You're a very well-informed person. I know that if there were a bigger rally than that, you would know about it. I think so.
Okay, Michael, we're going to put you on the spot here. Sort of the advice to the Conservatives is don't look like Trump and appeal to women. How's it going?
Yeah, I mean, come on. I chuckle at the exchange because it's so Pierre. But is it a good look? Maybe not. I'm not sure he cares. Maybe we're just in the dome here and kind of nitpicking and extrapolating these types of things. But it has been a part of the most interesting narrative, at least of this week, which is rally size. What does it mean? And kind of what on the ground kind of energy looks like in terms of kind of whipping up your base, energizing your base, bringing some morale to your volunteer base, and Pierre Poilievre has really commanded the news cycle, at least on that performative end of things.
Well, Zane, that's for sure. But there is a real strong base of Conservative support out there, and they are dedicated and they are devoted to Pierre Poilievre and admire him quite strongly. But he is in the polling, losing the horse race, and he's behind Carney as preferred Prime Minister. There's a favorability gap. I mean, Zane, how do you see things at the end of week 3?
The Conservatives needed to turn it around this week. And listen, I don't actually mind Pierre Poilievre talking about the polls. I just mind how we talked about the polls, and the rallies. And the what about the rallies is actually quite positive for him. We are bringing thousands of highly engaged people to show up to see me. That is actually a really interesting momentum turning point for him. But the problem is the way he did it. And now we're talking about the way he did it with the Globe and Mail reporter Laura Stone, which was weird, creepy, awkward, choose your own word, that is now driving the story versus the fact that Pierre Poilievre had thousands of people at his rally. And should we start looking at that as a key metric of what his strategy could be? And there's a viable strategy to say, I want to triple down on my base, which has got historically high support in nearly 40% in the polling aggregators, which is very high for Conservatives. I want to make sure those folks show up, and I'm going to rely on the fact that the Carney vote is soft and it's going to flee when they see what real viability looks like heading into week 4. But instead, we're talking about how he treated a reporter and what that ultimately looks like.
Yeah, Laura, it was the reaction to it was like fierce and kind of immediate. And I don't know if it was intended to be disrespectful or not, but it's like intent versus impact is what happens there. I mean, how did you view that interaction?
Intent versus impact is a really great way to put it. And I don't really know what his intention was. I don't particularly think it was necessarily malicious. But on the impact, listen, as a young woman, and I can say as a woman generally, we're used to that kind of an interaction, right? We get it at the bars, we get it in the workplace, and our immediate reaction is fight or flight normally, right? How do I make this end? How do I get him to listen to me? How do I get someone to pay attention? How do I get someone to make this wrap up so I can move away because this is making me really uncomfortable? And And again, the intent doesn't really matter. But I can tell you, my group chats, not necessarily my political ones, but my mom group chats, right? The daycare moms, that's what I heard was, do you know Laura Stone? How do you think she reacted to that? That made me feel like it reminded me of this time in XYZ. And that is really not what Pierre Poilievre needs right now, when he really needs to be appealing to women. And I think we may not see this in the polls. I'm not saying this is going to, change the outcome of the election, but that is going to be a lingering feeling for a lot of women across all demographics.
Michael, one white dude to another. I mean, how do they? How does your crowd close this gender gap? Because it is getting vast with women in the publicly available data, and even conservative MPs and candidates are saying to me they're getting it at the doors. I mean, with the time that's left, what do the Conservatives need to do there, you think?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think you look. Is Pierre Poilievre the cuddliest person that you'll ever encounter? No, he's not. I think that's obvious. That's never been something that was used to describe him. By the way, neither is Mark Carney, and by the way, neither was Justin Trudeau. Just ask, Jody Wilson-Raybould, Selena, Cedar Chauvin, and Jane Philpott. Like, politicians don't always need to be the cuddliest creatures that you'll encounter. And if you're going to draw the female vote, I don't, I'm again, as a white male, I hesitate to speak for them, but I'd imagine they care a lot about what regular people, everyone cares about, which is affordability, the cost of living, how to function and prosper in society. So I don't know if they need to cater a specific kind of policy, a suite of policy options for women. I just think it's about respect. It's about leadership.
Zane, what do you think? I mean, I appreciate what Mike is saying, and these are things that cut across all political constituencies, right? Young, old, diverse, white, and all of these things. But the gender gap is a thing. The Liberals have pulled even with men after being underwater with men under Trudeau, or close to even with men, and they're way ahead with women. What are your thoughts there?
I mean, a simple one I would just throw on the table, and Poilievre's still got time to implement this, is he doesn't have to be the only messenger. He can add other people into the mix. There are strong, capable, conservative women that are choosing to run behind Pierre Poilievre, that have chosen to run behind him years ago, that are going to win their seats, that were measuring the drapes to be cabinet ministers. They may or may not be. We'll find out. But where are they in the mix? This is the Pierre Poilievre show from the propositional, and this is the Pierre Poilievre show for the oppositional, which is he's both the attack dog, naturally, but he's also the guy that's trying to win over every demographic. Why put so much pressure on yourself? I get it. When you're 25 points up, you made it all happen, but you don't need to make all of it happen right now. And I think this may be the time, and they're not going to take advice from me, but maybe they are, that a bit more of the team could actually help showcase that there's a conservative thought process. There's a conservative bench. There's a conservative army that's ready to take over, not just this one guy that people find, at least certain demographics find, quite distasteful in this current present moment.
Yeah, Laura, quick thoughts on that, because for your crowd, Mark Carney is he's a big reason for this, but Melanie Joly is out there, Chrystia Freeland, even after losing the way she did. They're there in known quantities, right?
Yeah, and I mean, Zane's right. They have actually a pretty deep bench on the Conservative side that they could be pulling from, of also excellent communicators, right? He's not the only one who's phenomenal at this, and it would be prudent, I think, particularly when we're talking about women and boomers, to put out some of these other people. The Liberals, to your point, are doing it a little bit and probably have a different calculus there. But it's an opportunity I think they might be missing right now. Yeah, I'm going to make a push in the stretch run to get Gen X on the ballot here, because we're talking about millennials and boomers too much. So I want to get the 50-year-olds in. Okay, Abacus is now also showing a 6-point gap, which means pretty much all of the major polls have aligned on a Liberal lead. An Ipsos poll even said Mark Carney was preferred to handle energy and resources, which is going to shock Daniel Smith. And on Tuesday, Carney also made his own show of strength with a rally in Calgary.
A plan that builds an energy superpower in both clean and conventional energy. Researchers, private sector, federal, provincial government, Alberta ingenuity and drive. That same partnership can usher in a new clean energy era.
Okay, so Zane, being in Calgary, you popped by that rally to check it out. What did that turnout tell you? I mean, and this polling data that the Liberals are now trusted to develop resources more than the Conservatives, and they're getting credit for killing the carbon tax, even though it was their idea in the first place, which is the bizarro election at play here.
That's the one I was going to mention to you if you hadn't, which is the carbon tax killer Carney on a 2-to-1 question. So I guess we can have a carbon tax election and Carney would win that. But here we are, right? Listen, that rally, two things to mention. Number one, there was more people that wanted to come into that rally than ultimately got in. Number two, this is going to sound like an insult in any other campaign except this one. As soon as Mark Carney got on the stage, people kind of got bored and their blood pressure went down. And in any other campaign, that is a negative asset for a leader. But in this campaign, this bizarro campaign, Cochrane, as you have mentioned, that is what comforting looks like. That is what comfort looks like. They wanted not to be amped up to a 11 on a scale. They wanted to be brought down to earth and find someone who brought a level of competency, not necessarily charisma, to present to them. And that's what that crowd got. Did they leave energized? Sure. In a different way, in a very specific election way. It was weird, it was interesting, but I'll say this, it was effective for Mark Carney.
Michael, it is very weird when human Valium is an asset. You know what I mean? That you walk into a room and calm everyone down, but Zane felt reassured, you know, by all of this. I mean, look, not rally size, whatever, but 1,000 or so people going to see a Liberal in Calgary, that's unusual. What do you make of what we saw with this week with Carney out there?
Yeah, well, I think it's just, try and keep your foot on the pedal. If you're Mark Carney, you're trying to say as little as possible while still being visible and just keeping your trend line intact. And I agree with Zane. I mean, I don't understand this election. Like my mind has been just rattled with how this is playing out because none of it makes sense, at least to normal political convention. But what I think, my theory here, it probably aligns with Zane, is we are at a point in kind of global politics, geopolitics, where there's a lot of big, powerful, and even nasty, I'll use that descriptor, men commanding things here. And perhaps the best kind of temperament to meet the moment is a calm, assuring, even boring one. And Carney's certainly a few of those things in my opinion. So maybe that's working. I don't know. Like, honestly, it's going to take a long time to unpack this election. And it's not even over yet. We have still 2 weeks. And I'll point out to the listeners and to all of you that 2 weeks is an eternity in politics. A lot can happen. We witness it at the subnational level. We witness it at the federal level. So I'm not ready to call it yet. But there's certainly a bizarre kind of suite of factors here that have been booing Mark Carney for a long time now. And the Conservatives continue to seem to try and figure out what to do next in the face of all of it.
Well, look, 2 weeks could be 10 or 12 more pauses and unpauses on tariffs, and who knows what that, but, the way Zane is describing, it's like Mark Carney is the Calm app, and people downloaded it on their phone to reassure them. But there's been this shift, Laura, away from being an incumbent is political cancer and you're going to be defeated to Trump has put everyone on a wartime footing and they're going with stability, it seems. And that's what Carney seems to just be doing.
Yeah, and Carney seems to represent both the incumbent part, right? He's getting that advantage that does seem to happen in moments of crisis politically. But he's also got the calm stability and the experience that Canadians seem to want right now, at least a certain subset of Canadians. And he, when he comes out seeming a little bit more human or trying to do fun things, he comes across as almost like affectionately awkward, right? Like it's working on some level for Canadians because it's like they're seeing their principal or their dad or, their smarter uncle up there, and there's a comfort factor there. And witnessing, watching what happened in Calgary, I think is really interesting because it is so tempting to get so excited about that as a Liberal, right? Having 7 to 10 seats in play in Alberta is so exciting, but it's also, we all know that this election is going to be decided between Quebec, the GTA, and the Lower Mainland. And so I think it's also just a way for the Liberals to show momentum, right? To show that their momentum is matching the polls right now. Right. And I think it was a smart play on their part. It was a smart way to pull their resources, smart time to pull their resources off of door knocking.
Laura just lost 6 seats in Atlantic Canada by ignoring the region that voted majority for the Liberals the last 3 elections. Okay, they're probably not going to vote majority for the NDP because we talked last week about how NDP leader Jagmeet Singh was softening his language about becoming Prime Minister. But this week, the NDP and the Greens, they kind of threw in the towel on forming government.
Most of us, I think, know that Mark Carney is going to form the next government. But we want to make sure that when the Liberal wave crashes, there are people looking after Canadians.
I want Canadians to know that your vote does matter. Who's going to fight back against Mark Carney's cuts? No party should have all the power. Having New Democrats there and holding government to account will mean that Canadians would be better off.
Okay, so Laura, the Jonathan Pedno decision desk is projecting a Mark Carney government. Jagmeet Singh isn't going that far, but he's pretty close behind. I mean, what do these pleas do to the voting decisions for the rest of this campaign?
I mean, I don't know that either party had a ton of other options. Maybe Solberg or Zane see them and I don't. But it's also a tough play to make, I think, especially if you're Jagmeet Singh, right? He had an opportunity to topple the Liberal government in the fall, and he didn't. I think it's tough to now seem credible as the leader who's going to now hold Mark Carney to account when your most recent history was kind of waffling on a really big, important decision that could have changed the course of an election.
Yeah, Michael, like, can Jagmeet Singh sell this? I don't know, right? Like what we saw in Parliament after the supply and confidence agreement got torn up, I don't know. And how do you think voters are going to react to something like this?
Yeah, I don't know if the voters, even though Democrat voters, will particularly care about, what makeup of the legislature will be here after this. I think the viable path here is for New Democrat voters to suddenly have a crisis of conscience and realize that, look, all these issues we cared about for decades, we suddenly abandoned, and we're supporting Mark Carney, who, by and large, is supporting the complete opposite. His key policy planks are the complete opposite of what New Democrat voters and progressive voters typically cared about. And what I find most interesting about this, if it works, is not what it does to the New Democrats and how it favors the Conservatives, who need all the help that they can get right now, and reviving some of that New Democrat vote to dampen the efficiency of the Liberal vote. And yeah, newsflash, the Greens aren't forming government. So I'll put that to the side. But the New Democrats could play spoiler in some areas. They need to go from 6%, 8%, to 12, 15%. But it's possible if they do. And ensuring that, let's say you have New Democrat voters coming out to ensure that there isn't a progressive alternative, that there is another recognized party in the legislature. And if they do that, then things could get interesting here for the Conservatives and Liberals, who are, of course, the only two really warring here to form government.
Zane, what do you think?
See, I'm curious that Solberg reads it like that, because my read is slightly different. Because yes, on the surface, Jagmeet Singh is saying, elect more of us, we can hold the balance of power, we can get things done for workers, etc. But it's also a permission structure where in areas they're not competitive, that allows progressives to go vote Liberal. That's the subtext of what Jagmeet Singh is saying. And in that case, if you take my reading of it, it actually is not helpful to the Conservatives, because it allows that strategic voting and coalescing of the vote with the more viable, quote unquote, progressive party, albeit I think Solberg's point about Mark Carney moving the party to the right is a good one. So yeah, like on one read of it, Jagmeet Singh could be trying to make a stronger case for his party, but I don't think that's what he's doing. He's actually saying, we're not going to form government. Here's your permission structure to go vote Liberal in places where that's viable to stop the Conservatives. And I don't know what the next step is. Maybe we can talk about that in the podcast only version of this, David. But like, what do the NDP do here? Do they highlight the number of seats, which seats, etc.? I think that's what's fascinating. But my read of this is very much a permission structure that does not help Conservatives in this particular case.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's about saving incumbents. Maybe it's about the BC seats. I don't know, and we'll have to see. But look, we've got the debate. So, Zane, let's stay with you. We got the French debate. We got the English debate coming next week. What are you looking for in the next big inflection points and the only time they're all going to be together for the rest of this race?
Two things very quickly. Number one, how Pierre is Pierre Poilievre? Is there another version of him that's as authentic as the one we've seen over the last 2 years? And if not, how desperate is he when he's on that stage? Because he is going to try to swing big. It's the last big moment. It's the last big moment before a long weekend where people come together, they converge, they make decisions. So the amount of desperation that we see from Pierre Poilievre in terms of those haymakers, and as Solberg said earlier on a show we were on together, in terms of dressing down Carney, and if he can't, if that's the only move he has, how does he do it and how often he does it is the main thing I'm going to be looking for.
I can't believe you guys are cheating on the show with another show. Like, what the hell is that, Solberg? I mean, what do you but there's Statler and Waldorf of punditry. They're always together. Michael, what are you watching for the debates here?
Yeah, well, I'm watching for a swing to the fences here for Pierre Poilievre because he's going to be better. I mean, this is where his skill set should shine. This is where his experience in the political arena should shine, that many, especially the Liberals, have been, discounting as one of his weaknesses, that he's a career politician. Well, look, I think it's a great advantage of his that he's had 7 terms as an MP. He's been a cabinet minister. He's been on the opposition benches. He's been in the trenches. He's reflecting the anxieties of Canadians and his constituents. And he's been in a debate setting. In fact, he's been in a debate setting with Mark Carney. Recall that they appeared together at Finance Committee in 2021, 2022, where it was a bloodbath. Granted, then it was a lot easier to be that prosecutorial kind of attack dog, putting Carney on his back foot. This time, you wonder if that same approach, as tempting as it will be, will just turn off Canadians. Perhaps they won't like that tone. Perhaps they won't like that tenor. Perhaps they won't like to see Pierre eviscerate Mark Carney on the national stage. But it'll be awfully tempting. And whatever happens, expect it to happen the first 15 minutes, because as any debate prep will tell you, that's the only time where everybody is watching. People will soon turn on something else. Maybe not the people on this segment, but let's be real. Regular people, they're going to tune it off fast. So I think the big swings will come early in the debate. So I'll be watching for that.
Well, Laura, I think the people who watch the many shows that Zaina Michael on will stick with it. But your quick thoughts on this before we take a break.
So I have 2. One is very on brand for me for the show last week and this week, which is I'm actually looking to see what the leaders put in the window, if anything, for particularly Gen Z and women. Again, I think that these are 2 really big factors and demographics in this election that we don't talk that much about right now. The second one is actually exactly what Solberg was talking about. I think the contrast between Pierre Poilievre and Mark Carney in their style is going to be really, really highlighted, and this is going to be a big decision point for Canadians. Do you want this showmanship and to Michael's point, quite excellent debater? Or do you want someone who's going to appear a little bit calmer and cooler under pressure on that stage?
The human Valium, as Zane
The
calls it.
human
Exactly.
Valium, as Zane likes to call him.
And look, it's Gen Z in this. It's Gen Z in this time of Canadian patriotism, and once again, Gen X gets snubbed. Okay, we're going to end it there for our television program, but the gang's going to stick around. The 4 of us are going to stick around, and we're going to continue this conversation on the Power and Politics podcast feed. You can find our weekly wrap episode tomorrow morning and every Saturday throughout the campaign. So Laura, Zane, and Michael, thank you for that. The federal leaders' debates that we've been discussing, they are next week, and CBC News will bring you live coverage from Montreal. The French debate will take place on Wednesday, April 16th at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. You can watch that with simultaneous interpretation wherever you watch CBC News. And the English language debate is on Thursday, April 17th at 7 p.m. Eastern. You can watch that on CBC Television, CBC News Network, and everywhere you stream CBC News. And Power and Politics will have special pre-debate coverage both days live from Montreal. I'm David Cochrane. Thank you for watching Power and Politics. If you want to hear more of the weekly wrap or catch up on the campaign on the go, check out our Election Daily podcast, available wherever you get your podcasts, and look for that special Saturday edition in your feed tomorrow. We'll be back with the TV show on Monday. Hannah Mansing Tonight is up next on CBC News Network.